if you're being constantly switching from one thing to another, which is what happens when you've got the little numbers coming up on your email, or when you've got the buzzers or the dings or the jumps up and down or whatever. Those things constantly capture your attentional network, which means your attentional network is being used every time that happens, which means you're basically running out of money in your attentional network, which means that it then can't do that extra cool stuff, which is to think about cool ideas.
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello and welcome to a Pondering Life episode of the Share.care podcast. Our belief is that global peace starts at home. Feeling safe, valued, and heard gives you a foundation to confidently step out and make the world a happier and safer place for everyone. Because in today's world, it's in your own interest to help others. And today, it is my great pleasure to have back with me again Dr. Mark Williams, who's a neuroscientist committed to improving learning, productivity, and well-being for everyone. And he has a great book, The Connected Species. So audience, please check that out, and we'll have that details in the show notes where you can find that book. And today, Dr. Mark, we're talking about how to use technology to improve your intelligence, which I think is really probably a very prominent topic given the way AI is now becoming so prominent and people are using it so much. Is there a danger with AI and well, I think it's been going throughout history whenever we have a technological innovation that we might be becoming dumber, or how do we use the technology to avoid that and become more intelligent?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's something that we need to be really focusing on at the moment, because I think the way we are using technology at the moment is actually making us dumber. We know we're getting less intelligent since we've had a lot of this technology. And so we really need to flip the script on this and start using it in ways which are positive. And it's not the technology itself, it's just the way we're actually using it. And there are really positive ways to use it. And I think that's really important to think about. I think the other thing, which you brought up, the artificial intelligence idea, but unfortunately, it's not a new technology. The artificial intelligence isn't new. It's something that's been. I was using it 25 years ago to analyze fMRI data. It's actually just learning algorithms, and there's nothing intelligent about it. It's not artificial intelligence. I think there's been a whole bunch of tech gurus out there spruiking this thing as this new intelligence that's out there that we need to be scared of, or that is going to change our world. It's been around for a long time. It's just been made more accessible recently, and it's just a learning algorithm. So just like you can teach a slug to go in a certain direction when the colours on the ground are a certain colour, you can teach these programs to do certain things, but there's nothing intelligent about them, because to be intelligent, you need to be generating new concepts and you need to be generating new ideas, and these algorithms can't do that. All they're doing is regurgitating what's actually on the internet at the moment. So they're a more sophisticated version of Google, but that's all they are.
Well, that was my understanding as well, because I know in my using of things like ChatGPT, Bard, and those other AI tools, I've found that it really is just regurgitating some standard concepts. It's not really, well, certainly doesn't end some of the concepts that I've developed, and I'm sure you've had the same thing with your own developments, that it's not mainstream. Well, maybe yours is, but mine isn't mainstream because I protect it. And so it doesn't know that. So when I put queries in around my technology, it doesn't know how to answer. So is it really just I'm going to say advanced research tool, but even then I don't think that's probably not the correct way of describing it.
Yeah, it is just a learning algorithm. So it's just what we call a support vector machine, where what it's doing is learning the difference between two categories and separating those out. And now they've put into it so that it understands language, so it understands the rules behind language, so therefore it can regurgitate information based on new sentences. But all that information is what's on the internet, and it's just regurgitating it in different ways. So if you look at a lot of the time, you can actually then search whatever it brings up. You can then search and you'll find it on Google somewhere, and it'll come up, on somebody else's website or whatever. And that's a real problem, because there's a lot of intellectual property that's been stolen by this, because it's stuff that's on the internet, and it's other people's stuff on their website, for example, that it's pulling and then giving to you as though it's its thoughts, and it's not its thoughts. It's simply stolen from someone else, and it doesn't reference properly, so it doesn't actually tell you where it gets it from. So you don't actually know where all these informations come from and who you should actually be citing. And I think that's a real problem with the artificial intelligence at the moment, the way a lot of people are using it. I think a lot of students are getting into, well, I know from university, a lot of students are getting in trouble now because they're using it and then they're not citing it, because they think it's this program's actually coming up with these ideas. And so they can then submit this report with these ideas. And then when we look it up, we go, well, hang on, that was already said by so-and-so, or that came from this paper or whatever. And it wasn't cited properly, and that's plagiarism, which is actually unethical and against all the university rules. So we need to be careful, I think, with artificial intelligence, and we need to stop calling it artificial intelligence, because there's nothing intelligent about it. It's just a more sophisticated search tool.
Yeah, I 100% agree that we should stop calling it. It's a misnomer to call it intelligent. That being said, as we've moved through technology, as you said, people aren't getting smarter, but there are some people that are getting smarter. So coming back to our topic, I mean, I think that technology, I certainly know from my point of view, and when I use it, I'm taking that information going, okay, there's some research there. How does that fit? And I'm actually cognitively thinking about what that is and where that fits within my objectives. How does someone use technology, let's start more broadly, to actually improve how they think? Because I feel if you're actually leveraging it, using it as a force multiplier, then it could be very useful and you could actually speed up your process. How can someone link that use of that with bringing in your expertise as a neuroscientist to actually improve cognitive ability?
Yeah, so what we need to think about is what is it that's different about the technology compared to our own brains? And so how can we use the technology in a way that compensates for some of the issues with our own brain? And of course, one of the big issues with our brain is that we have our working memory is really limited. So what we can think about at any one time is very limited. So the technology is great for holding information for us that we can then circle back to later. So having large amounts of data, having large amounts of information, we can't hold that in our own working memory, and we have a lot of trouble, fidgeting around with that ourselves. But using technology to do that for us is really advantageous, and it can summarize data. It can give us ideas about what's important in the data and what's not important in the data, and so on, using different statistics or algorithms, or working things like learning algorithms and so on will give us a lot of information. So holding large amounts of information is a really important thing that we can do with this technology, and gives us more information than we would have normally, because our brains aren't good at doing that. Mm-hmm. Also, so setting up our routines, setting up our day, and managing our calendars, for example. So managing what we're going to do during the day. Again, we're not good at doing that. We tend to just do what's in front of us, and we're easily distracted by things. So, setting up your calendar in a way which means that you know what you're doing every 30 minutes or every hour, and you stick to that. And so you're actually, focusing on each of those minor things as you're going through them, and make sure they're minor so you can actually get them done during those periods of time, is a really good way to set it up so that you're constantly on task, and so that you're constantly keeping up with what it is that you're supposed to be doing, rather than just simply going with the flow. and getting pushed around based on what everybody else's needs are. And so that's another really good aspect to it, is keeping us on task and making us remember what tasks we've actually got to do, and when we've actually got to do them. I've seen a friend who's got on her smartphone, she has alarms every 30 minutes, which actually are set up for each single task that she's got to do every day, so that, it goes off every 30 minutes to say, if you finish that task, you go to this task, and now you've got to go and do this task, and now you've got to go for a walk with the dog, and now you've got to, which is really good for her because she's very easily distracted. But when she has that, she's very, very on task and very focused. So that's another great way you can use technology to actually keep you working. But it's really important, I think, that we think about, what our brains are good at, and we do that with our brains, and then what the technology adds to that, which can enable us to be more efficient.
And taking that a step further with managing your day in that way, because if we don't manage our day well, we can easily get overwhelmed. And as you mentioned, that thinking part of our brain, if I'm sorry if I'm not using the correct term, but the conscious part, the conscious part of our brain can only hold so much information, but the unconscious part of it is quite, if I understand correctly, it has a whole lot of information from that. But to access that, we need to be in if I understand correctly, a relaxed state. And I know from my example, and anyone watching me around my house would think I'm pretty weird when I walk into the shower and I'm carrying my phone with me, because oftentimes I like to have long showers and I'll be relaxed and all these ideas will pop into my head. So I just, because the phone's waterproof, I just make some notes on that, and as I do that. Is that part of how we can use technology to improve our intelligence as well, to be able to tap into that unconscious part of our brain by being a little bit more organized, therefore less stressed, and allowing that part to flow through? How does that connection work?
Yeah, no, you're right. So our working memory is really limited. So the conscious, if you like, part of your brain, but the unconscious part of our brain is we think unlimited. We don't know. We haven't found the limit to how much can be packed into our long-term memory, or our unconscious part of our brain, which is pretty cool because it means that we've got a long way to go in our abilities in the future. And back there in our unconscious brain, all that stuff is actually being rejigged and moved around and all of those sorts of things, so that it's making new connections and it's making new ideas and making new concepts. But unless you actually slow down and relax and allow those new ideas to come to your conscious part of your brain, then you're never going to know that all that good stuff's going on. So those people who are really busy all the time and stressed all the time are probably having genius moments, but they're not actually aware of those genius moments where they could be, coming up with the next grand thing that could be making them a fortune, and they miss out on it because they're constantly busy. So we need to slow down, and there's different ways to do that. Of course, there's a whole big push for meditation at the moment. I used to meditate a lot. I don't anymore. I find it's something that you need to practice regularly to actually do meditation properly. And you can't do it on an app. So meditation on an app doesn't actually work. You actually got to learn how to meditate properly, which isn't guided meditation, but it's actual proper meditation. And to do that does take a lot of practice and a constant practice. So I used to do it, but I don't have the patience anymore, especially with kids, nor the time with teenagers around. So I don't do that anymore. But I go surfing, and I find that's my shower time, if you like, and it's my time to just chill. If there's no waves around, you're bobbing around at the back and just waiting, and that's when I allow myself to get those moments. And also walking the dog. I walk the dog without my phone, so that I can just concentrate on the moment, concentrate on my breathing, and concentrate on my walk. But that also is when I get a lot of really cool ideas coming up. And so, we need to do things like that to actually allow ourselves to have access to that long-term memory. And, of course, technology is great for that because we can download everything onto our technology and then leave it behind, right? I mean, my phone, it's a great example, right? If I leave my phone at home and go for a surf, then if people call me, if people text me, if people email me, all of that stuff is then saved on my phone. So when I come back, I can then check it. the big problem we have is people don't allow their phone to actually save information for them. They check it every time it dings or every time it buzzes, right? And that's just interrupting them. Whereas what we should be doing, and it's really bad for your brain. So we know that,
Explain that part that it's really bad for your brain. That would be.
Yeah, so if we're constantly being distracted by things such as the dinging and the buzzing, so each time you get distracted, because our working memory, as we talked about, is really capacity limited. Each time your attention's grabbed by something else, then it shifts what's in your working memory to that new thing, and so it shifts everything out of your working memory. But it means that you actually lose the last 90 seconds of what you were doing as well. So I'm sure you've had the experience of somebody knocks on your door, for example, and you attend to them, and then when you go back to what you were doing, you're sort of like, what was I doing? And you have to go back a little bit to work out where you're at and what you're actually doing. Or if you're watching something, you have to go back a bit. Or if you're watching TV, you have to ask somebody with you, hey, what did I miss? But you've got to go back 90 seconds, right? So every time your phone beeps or buzzes or whatever, you're losing the last 90 seconds of what you were doing. Now, if you think how many times you get disrupted during the day, times that by 90 seconds, that's how much time you're losing every day out of your life, which is a huge amount of time. Yeah, and that's if you don't actually look at it. That's if you don't actually do anything about it. If you actually do something about it, then it's even worse. So we need to stop that aspect to it, but we need to use it in a way which is good for our brain, which is holding that information there. So if you turn off your notifications and then schedule into your day when you're going to check your phone and when you're going to check your email and when you're going to do those things, it actually improves your mental health. So you improve your mental health within about 2 weeks. And it also, means that you're not losing those 90 seconds whenever, depending on how often your phone buzzes. And so you get a lot more time back in your day. So you're not as stressed because you've got a lot more time to walk the dog or go for a surf or have long showers or whatever it is that you actually want to do, because you've got a huge amount of time back in your day to get those things done.
Yeah. Does that, I mean, because from my operation, day-to-day life, whichever way you want to look at it, I turned off all notifications a long time ago, even on my emails on the computer. Not only did I turn off the dinging, I actually turned off the little thing that shows how many unread emails you've got. So I have no idea what I've got unless I look at it. And I noticed from my perspective, my life became a lot more relaxed. But also how does the brain work? Because I was wondering about that. I seem to have more time now where I have those innovation moments. And it's a lot more, for me, it seems to be, these inspirations will come more often. Yes, I mentioned the shower before, and I do my gumping as well, which is mowing the lawn up and down with my little electric lawnmower, which I find those times. But I also find during the day I might be working and doing something and thinking about it, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of ideas will come, and I went, oh, that's a new take on that, and how I could do that. Is that part of that process when we stop allowing ourselves to be distracted, and do we actually lower ourselves to a more relaxed state to allow that unconscious thoughts to come through?
Yeah, absolutely. So because every time, so you've got your attentional network, which is the thing that actually holds the information in your long-term memory, and it also determines what information will go into it. So will information go into it from your long-term memory, so your unconscious area of the brain, or will it come in from externally? And so if you don't have all those distractions, it's not constantly being distracted. Your attention's not constantly being distracted by outsourced things such as dinging and buzzing and all those things. Then it has a lot more capacity, because if you think about it, it's like any other. You can think about it like a muscle, right? And if it's constantly switching from one thing to another, to another, to another, it gets worn out. It actually gets exhausted. And so it can't then work as efficiently. And so it's just going to be focused on trying to keep you on task for things that are coming in, and then not have any capacity left for thinking about what's actually in your long-term memory and what's meaningful in your long-term memory and all those sorts of things, which is why a lot of people feel completely exhausted by the end of the day these days, because their attention is constantly being shifted from one thing to another rather than just focusing on one thing. And we know that if you've got two things to do, and you switch from one thing to another and back and back and back and back, that takes 25% longer than if you just do one thing and focus on it, and then do the other thing and focus on it. So again, and you're less stressed. So there's lower cortisol levels when you do that. So cortisol is a really good indication of stress levels. So if you're being constantly switching from one thing to another, which is what happens when you've got the little numbers coming up on your email, or when you've got the buzzers or the dings or the jumps up and down or whatever. Those things constantly capture your attentional network, which means your attentional network is being used every time that happens, which means you're basically running out of money in your attentional network, which means that it then can't do that extra cool stuff, which is to think about cool ideas and get stuff from your long-term memory and all those things that are really important for being innovative and creative.
And does that even apply? Because for things like listening to music while you're doing something, I find if I'm writing or doing something creative and I've got some music playing, which is kind of a juxtaposition for me as well, because I now run a radio station. So I kind of want to listen to what's on the radio station, but at the same time I've got work to do. But I've found if I try and listen to what's going on and I'm trying to write, I can do things where it doesn't require a lot of cognitive thought or that working mind thought. But if I've actually got to do something that's quite creative, I find that music becomes a distraction. Is that also part of that backwards and forwards that you're talking about as well?
Yeah, it is. It's also, music is a fascinating area that we don't understand. We know a little bit about, but we don't know a lot about. But there's some really neat research showing that if you want to do deep work, the stuff that you're talking about, the really deep thinking, having music on which doesn't have lyrics is really good, but having music on that does have lyrics, it's going to the voice is going to capture your attention, and so therefore that's going to interfere with that deep work. But if you have like Mozart or something that just is musical, and there's a lot on the internet now that are just musical, which are to help you get into that deep thinking. It does seem to help you because it relaxes you. And music seems to be this primitive thing that helps us relax and does a whole bunch of different things, which are really cool. But it has to be just no lyrics in it. The lyrics will distract you and therefore can impact on your ability to think deeply.
Yeah, I certainly noticed that from when I'm doing that as well, that the lyrics do become distracting. And I also use music. I use what's called Ho'oponopono music, which is very, and I use that as a kind of a meditation where I listen to that and just allow myself to relax and just focus on my breathing from time to time. And I found that became a very good way of relaxing. What about the retention side of things when we're talking about improving your intelligence and your ability to retain information? If I remember correctly, last time we talked, you mentioned that when you go to bed, your brain replays things in reverse. So what you're thinking about most when you go to bed at that time is what you'll first start thinking about. And from that conversation, I'd kind of had something similar along that line with my son, talking to him about his homework, telling him, just when you're laying in bed, think about your homework, not realizing what you had said. And then when I explained that to him as well, and it seems, I'm guessing something along those lines is working because I know he doesn't do a lot of homework, but he gets really good results for his exams. So there's something that's working there. But how can we leverage that to actually improve our intelligence and our ability to achieve the things that we want to achieve?
Yeah, it's a great hack because it does seem to work really well, and you don't need to go through all of the information that you want to learn. You can just cue yourself, which is probably what your son is doing, by just thinking about what it was, and then when you go into the sleep mode, then it'll sort of bring up everything associated with that, which is really cool. So if you just write notes during the day, just key words or key sentences associated with what you want to remember, and then just before you go to sleep at night, you read those, then that'll cue you so that when you go to sleep and hit that REM stage where you're laying down those memories, that it'll go through that list. But not only will go through that list, it seems to hit each of those keywords or key sentences and then think about the other things associated with that. So you do just need to put down those keywords or the key concepts, which will sort of get your brain thinking about those things just before you go to sleep, and then that'll be the first stuff that comes up during the night.
So what you're talking about there is SEO your brain.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. And
exactly.
taking that a step further with technology and allowing if you've got into that relaxed state, because I did this recently with a legal case that I was working in. I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, I like to try and understand a bit and be able to put those logical arguments there and not just rely on the advice that I'm given, but be able to have some understanding of that. And what I did with this legal case is I actually went to ChatGPT and I put in the problem and asked for some information about arguments that could be used to solve this case. And it didn't actually give the detail because it doesn't know the detail, but it actually gave me prompts to think about that I hadn't actually thought about as a legal argument. And then from there, I went, we can structure the argument slightly different around this concept. And then we came up with two new very strong arguments that supported this case. Is that I mean, when we're talking about, is that actually improving our intelligence using things that way, or am I just becoming very lazy and not getting the books out and doing the research?
No, I agree. I mean, it's like having another person in the room, right, who's going to come up with other ideas. So rather than hiring an extra person to have those ideas, you can use something like ChatGPT, and it'll come up with ideas. I'm currently working with a colleague, an ex-principal, on a program for boys. And we were having trouble coming up with a good title, or a title that we both liked in regards to this program. So we put what we were talking about into ChatGPT and said, come up with 10 different titles. And it came up with 10 different titles, and some of them we hadn't thought of. And then we ended up searching them all to make sure that no one else had already used these, so that it wasn't plagiarizing. But then we ended up, taking half of one and half of another and putting those together to make the one that we ended up using for the program. So it's really good for that, for coming up with novel ideas, as long as you're then using that in a responsible way by checking that it's not someone else's idea, that it's stolen, and B, then thinking about it. I have received emails from people where they've obviously used ChatGPT and not even looked at it, right? And then they've just sent on the email, and it's like, that's really lazy, and they're not improving their intelligence because they're just using ChatGPT to do all their writing for them. But I've also heard students, which I think is fine, is students will write a whole an essay or a report and then put it into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will then mark it for them. Basically, it'll fix their grammar and so on. Now, that's fine if they're then looking at how it's fixed their grammar so they get better and they can fix it themselves next time, right? And that's like having an extra teacher there to actually, improve their grammar and improve their understanding of the English language, which is very damn confusing, to be honest, for most of us. So that's a great way to use it as well. And again, you can learn a lot from that, as long as you're taking it the next step where you're actually then looking at what it's done and working out whether or not what it's done is appropriate, and working out how you can then use that in the future to improve your intelligence and not make those mistakes next time. And so it's fantastic for that, especially with grammar, right? Because it's using all the proper rules in relation to grammar. So it can really improve your writing if you use it to help you learn.
Is that observation part a good way of learning? Do you actually retain from that? I remember when I was studying neurolinguistic programming, and there was a story, and I can't remember if it was Bandler or Grindler, the two people that founded neurolinguistic programming, if that's the correct way of putting it. But one of them was, when they were younger, they were observing someone do these studies and provide advice, and after watching it for so many times, just observing, and that was their job, to observe and watch it. And the facilitator became stuck in this process and couldn't actually resolve the situation. And Bandler Green, whichever one it was, had an epiphany from watching it, ran down and solved the problem. Is that part of that process? Does the brain work that way, where if you're actually paying attention and observing and I would say listening, but actually fully embodying what's going on, will that sink in and help improve your intelligence? And that's where I'm coming back to that AI principle, if you, as you said, you're using it to help you correct grammar, and then you're actually paying attention to that, well, will that increase your intelligence?
Yeah, that's actually the best way to learn, right? We actually learn better when we're wrong and we're corrected. So error correction is the best way to actually for people to learn. And it's one of the things that really frustrates me in schools today, because in schools today, they'll often give tests and then hand back the test to the students, but then they don't go through the test with the students, because the best way
you get a participation trophy, don't you? You don't get a mark. You just say, oh, you've attended.
You've attended, so you're all good, right? And the most important aspect of doing a test is actually being shown why you got things wrong, because that's how you actually learn. A great example is which I really like is, when we're toddlers, when we first see a dog, for example, the carer will turn around and point to the dog and say, dog. And in the toddler's mind, automatically it comes up with two hypotheses. Either that item is called dog, that's its name, or there's a whole bunch of these things. There's a whole category of these things called dogs. And then the next time the toddler sees a dog and the carer goes dog, then they automatically learn, oh, it's not an item, it's not that other thing's name, it's all of these names. And so therefore there's a whole category of these, right? They learn through actually being wrong and learning from that. And that's how we learn. That's how our brains learn. And so having those opportunities to be wrong and then learning from that, you can't be too wrong. So there's a sweet spot. You want to be wrong about 70% of the time. And if you're wrong 70% of the time, then you don't get deflated and turn off.
Yeah.
But you're getting that 30% where you're actually learning stuff. Because, yeah, when you're right, you're actually not learning anything, right? Because you're right. So you already had that in your long-term memory. So when you're wrong and you get corrected, that's when you learn. That's when we all learn. And so having ChatGPT there as a tool for telling us when we're wrong, it is a really good thing and will really improve our intelligence if we're engaged in it, and if we're actually learning from it, if we're actually taking note of where we were wrong. If we're just, putting it in there and then submitting it and forgetting about it, then that's not going to be helpful. But if we go back and check, then it's going to be hugely helpful.
Where does that fit? Because within perspective of learning, this thinking that you might have got it wrong. And I remember when we talked last time, you mentioned about the perception that we have is our reality. So if we believe something is right, so if we get that feedback and go, hey, this part here needs to be done differently, but we have a mindset that says, no, you're wrong, I'm right. Where's that going to sit within the learning? It's probably a rhetorical question, but where's that can you expand on that as to how that might limit the learning and how we can overcome that? Especially, I guess what I'm getting with that is that ego. Ego is probably not the right word, but maybe insecurity, that some people might feel insecure and not want to accept that they're wrong because they see it as a personal failure. I'm kind of putting a lot in there at once. So that's kind of like a triple barreled question, but if you can expand on that, that would be great.
Yeah, no, sure. So that's where, the catch term, psychological safety comes in, which is all around this idea that everyone feels safe in the environment and it's okay to be wrong. And so we really need everybody to have that mindset of psychological safety where we're all going to make mistakes, but that's really important in the process of innovation and creativity, because to be innovative and creative, you have to come up with weird and wacky ideas, and some of them are going to be stupid and we're going to not do them, but some of them occasionally are going to be gems that we're going to work with, right? And so we need to be willing to do that. And also when you're learning, you need to be willing to be wrong and engaged in that process. But you do get people who aren't engaged in the process and therefore don't want to be wrong, and therefore aren't going to be willing to admit that they're wrong. And so those people aren't going to learn when they're wrong because of that. Whatever you want to call it, you can call it lots of different things.
Because I think we've all had that friend that comes up to you and goes, "Oh, I just had a learning experience," and then you go and watch them do that same learning experience again. So really, they didn't learn from that first experience. So what stops that process of that ability to learn, to take that on board?
Yeah, it depends on the complexity of what you're trying to learn. So if it's beyond where you're at, so I think we also talked about last time that we've got to build up our knowledge. We can't just
Mm.
go from knowing times table to understanding quantum physics, right? You've actually got to build up the knowledge in between before you can get there. So sometimes with that, when people go, "I just had a learning experience," and then they go and do the same thing again, often it's because they haven't had the opportunity to actually embed that idea yet.
Mm.
And so sometimes it's that. Sometimes if it's related to a motor process, for example, then your motor plans in your brain are much harder to change, and so that takes a lot more repetition to actually get that change actually occurring. But
Mm.
also with a lot of our biases and a lot of our heuristics that I think you were alluding to before, we have a whole bunch of biases and heuristics in our brain that have been embedded there over many, many, many years. And so those things, again, are going to be much harder to shift. So,
Mm.
those things are going to be, take a lot longer. And you're going to have to find many, many, many instances of being incorrect to actually shift those. Whereas other things like, if I told you that, I don't know, it's something that a guaf is pink, then you don't know what a guaf is, so therefore you're going to accept that without any problems at all. Whereas if I tried to tell you that actually flamingos are green, then I'm going to have to really prove that to you
Yes.
before you're going to accept that.
You're out with a spray paint.
Yeah.
With that that process, and you mentioned that it's harder to do that, and I'm drawing on my experience with neurolinguistics and other areas that I've studied, and again, mine is very rudimentary compared to your knowledge of how the brain works. But I understood, and I've played with this a little bit in my own mind, which might have been dangerous. I don't know where I might have taken myself, programmed myself. But the way it was put to me many years ago was that your mind, it's each day is like a weaving loom. So a thread goes across and that creates, a pattern of thoughts, and they use that analogy, and as it builds up. And so an event that happened here, the meaning that you gave that will then filter through, and over time, that affects how you are today. And depending on, some have stronger events than others. And the theory was that if you went back and changed that, um, the meaning of what that event was, obviously you can't change the event, you can't go, but what it meant to you. If you changed that meaning of what that event was and you made it congruent with everything else, then you could actually change very, very quickly. Is that, and I've played with that, and in some areas I've had some pretty good success where the things that I've been fluffing around with for a long time, saying I've got to stop doing that, stop doing this, and then when I went back and without really getting into the detail of what it was, I just went, okay, this is going to change whatever it was, and it did. Is that, is that theory somewhat sound, or is there other things at play there that make that? What I'm getting to, is there ways we can make it easier for us to make that change, and so that we can do things much more quickly?
Yeah, so our memories, our long-term memories, we now know that our memories aren't actually there for us to remember the past. Our memories are just there for us to act in the future. And so our brain at night is constantly changing those memories based on what's been useful for you and what's going to help you in the future. So we don't have this theoretical memory of the past. We have a memory of the past which has been altered slightly continuously to make our lives easier and better now. Now, if you've got bad memories in there that are making you, think of someone, say, an addict who had an awful childhood and had a whole bunch of awful things happen to them, which led to them becoming an alcoholic. Then those memories, if you can alter those memories so that those memories, that they treat them more as a learning experience, so that they can help them to be a better person in the future and so on, then that can actually help with the depression and the anxiety and everything on the mental health issues they've got around the alcoholism and all those sorts of things as well. And
Mm.
so, yeah, we can change those memories at night. That happens again during sleep. And so they are going to make us more willing or more able to act more positively in the future if we change them in a positive way. And they can be changed because our brains are basically just using them to act, and therefore changing them when it believes that by changing them we're going to act better. And so if we can convince our brains basically that by changing certain things or the way we perceive certain things, that will actually make things better in the future, it is definitely a positive, can actually help in that way. There's the other side of it as well, which is the way we learn. There's this concept of learning called Hebbian learning, which the little saying goes, cells that fire together wire together. And this is the idea that when you're actually learning something, or every day when we're doing things, when we're doing two things together, and there's a whole bunch of neurons firing associated with that, they're more likely to fire together next time as well. Or if one of them fires and the other one's also going to fire, if that's happened a lot. So the example I like to give is when I smell cinnamon, I often remember my father, because my father used to bring home apple pie whenever he had a win at the races or something. And so he'd bring home apple pie and that smelled of cinnamon.
That's cool, apple pie.
Yeah, so that would remind me of my father. Because the cells, all those cells associated with smelling apple pie and my father being happy and a relationship with the father, all those things in my childhood and so have all been wired up together. So now when I smell apple pie, all those other memories also activate as well. And so if we can change that as well, if there's certain things that you associate with bad memories, if you can start associating them with good experiences or good memories, then you won't have that trigger for those bad memories. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
By changing that wiring around.
That makes a lot of sense. The other component of that I was wondering about that may help speed up that process, and it's something that I've played with, is, from what I understand, what I've been taught, is your mind can't not think about something. So if I say don't think of a pink elephant, you've got to think about it, reference it to be able to know what not to think about. And I noticed this a lot. Two examples. One, I used to be a smoker on and off, and I could always quit smoking whenever I wanted. But I noticed when I did that, it was always about, I changed my thinking to going, I want to breathe clean air. So as a result, I just didn't have the desire to do that. And I put that in the same context with procrastination, because I personally believe procrastination doesn't exist. In any given moment, you're doing exactly what you want to be doing or what you're thinking about. And I've done that test where I've been binge watching a TV series, and I've got some other work to do, not pressing, and I've consciously changed my thought process to going, I actually would, this report's really important to me, I need to get that done. And I noticed it physically became uncomfortable to watch the next episode. Is that something else that we can do to help speed up the process of those changes, being very clear about what we're trying to achieve as opposed to what we're trying to avoid? Is there a difference in how the brain works and how we can use that differently to create that, to speed up that process?
Sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. I didn't want to cough in the middle of your chat.
I thought you were looking at something. If I had known that, I would have stopped talking a little bit earlier.
No, I just needed to cough. I just didn't want to have a big cough in the middle of a lovely question. Yes, and you're doing it the right way, but a lot of people do it the wrong way. So they'll turn around and go, I want to stop smoking because it's bad for me, or I want to stop smoking because I smell, or I want to stop smoking because I don't want to be unhealthy. Whereas what you need to do is go, I want to stop smoking because I want to be healthy, or I want to run a marathon, or I want to. So you need to turn it into a positive, and then you're more likely to do it. You're more likely to move around. So again, when you were binge watching and you turned around and said, this is an important project that I want to do, rather than I need to stop binge watching because it's a waste of time. So by turning it into a positive means that you actually end up doing it. And there's been lots of research around that. And a lot of the the advertisements to try and get us to stop doing things, they do it the completely wrong way, in that they actually tell us what not to do rather than telling us what to do. So they'll, don't litter, for example. It's the worst message to give people. The best message, of course, is put your litter in the bin, and then you'll have it clean. And those sorts of things. Or stop smoking. It's the worst thing to say. What we should be doing is let's all be healthy and let's look after each other, or something similar to that. So it's a beautiful way to do it, but reframing it in a positive, the thing that you want to do into a positive, rather than making the thing that you don't want to do a negative, is the best way to do that. And our brains like that a lot more.
And to add to that process as well, the rewards that we give ourselves, and I'll link this to the story again, drawing my son in. He's going to be maybe you'll need to see a shrink if he watches my episodes, which is probably not likely. But when he was, always through, and without realizing I was doing this, I was rewarding him for the effort that he made. So when he got a good result, I said, good effort on getting that done, or good effort on the study to get that done. So I was rewarding the effort. And not too long ago, I saw studies that showed that actually if you reward the child's effort as opposed to the child themselves or their identity, they're more likely to actually perform really well. If you reward their identity, then they think they are that person, and they might not, put the effort in later. But I extrapolated that to yourself as well, as I tend to do. It's like, well, if it applies to someone else, in our own thinking, does that apply as well? So when we're rewarding ourselves and with our own self-talk, what are ways that we can actually give ourselves more motivation and encourage us and inspire us to move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. One thing I would say, rewards actually work much better when they're intermittent rather than every time, or each time you actually achieve something. You want to do it randomly when you're actually going to be rewarded, rather than all.
I did that unknowingly as well. So sometimes I reward him, sometimes I didn't.
You don't, right? So that's great. And so we want to do that with ourselves as well. And I think it's really important. Well, I don't think, but the research shows it's really important not to just reward yourself when you get a big win, right? Because the big wins,
they don't
always come. They definitely don't always come. But also, you could have a couple of good wins in a row and then not have another big win for quite a while, and so it's not going to be very rewarding for you. And so you want to reward, a good job done, right? Actually getting stuff done, or achieving stuff, or putting the effort in to get stuff done, rather than rewarding yourself because you've had a big win, or whatever it happens to be. So constantly rewarding yourself, but intermittently, not every day or whatever, but rewarding yourself, around that. And when you're actually just getting stuff done, I concentrate. I spent the last 2 days concentrating really hard on getting this thing done that I wanted to do. So I'm going to have a break now and go for a surf, or I'm going to have a break now and go out to lunch with my wife or my mates, or whatever it is that floats your boat, is really important. And it's important for us to do that regularly, not just when we have the big wins, because if you're waiting for each big win, then it's going to be exhausting.
Well, I understood the utility that you get, the benefit that you get, is there's a certain amount that goes to a certain level based on the type of reward, but after that, so maybe you just say you extreme here, you do something and you buy yourself a car, as opposed to do yourself and say, hey, you do something and go, yep, you did a really good job, fantastic. The utility of that car, the extra benefit you get, is actually very little, if anything, than even just a pat on the back. Is that how the brain works? And so is it a case of, because I know from using my example, there'll be days where it might not be a great day as far as achievement goes. Things come left, right, and center, and everything that I planned to do just went out the window, and I had to deal with the spot fires. But at the end of the day, I'll say, hey, I did really well in solving those spot fires, and I'll look for what works and give myself the reward for that. Is that utility incorrect, where if you just find the things that work, you'll get the same benefit, as opposed to buying yourself a new car when you achieve something?
Yeah, the benefit, well, the reward value for your brain is the same whether you buy yourself a new car or you go for a coffee with a friend. Because the amount of dopamine that you've got that can be released in your brain is the same amount, right? And so you get the same release of dopamine in your brain, which activates the same neurons, whether or not you're going for a coffee with your friends because you got some shit done, or you bought yourself a brand new car because you got lots of shit done. And the actual reward value for your brain's the same for both of those things. So you're better to have those little rewards, coffee regularly, than you are to wait 6 months and then just buy yourself a car and you're going to get the same reward value for your brain there. So reward yourself regularly with little rewards, and it's much, much better off than one big reward. Which is why, I don't know if your teachers do it, but some of my kids' teachers, they did it in primary school. They don't do it these days now they're in high school. But when they're in primary school, they used to go, if you're all good for the whole term, then we'll have a party at the end of the term. And it's like, these kids aren't going to wait a whole term to wait for it. Right? It's not gonna, and they have all these charts up on the board with all the numbers and all the rest, and none of that, we know none of that works because they're not getting any reward for moving up and down on little numbers because that's not rewarding to them. And you're waiting a whole term to give them something, whereas you could just walk up to them regularly and go, "Hey, that was good job, well done." You can have 5 minutes off, or you can go out and play in the playground 5 minutes early or whatever because of that'd be much more beneficial, and you can do that once a week or twice a week and get much more benefit out of it than having this big reward at the end of the term that isn't going to work, and the kids are going to be just as disruptive as they would have been if you didn't give them any reward. So definitely need to have those little constantly.
Yeah, I found that worked in my house, again, using my son as a reference. God, he's going to have problems. But things around the house, years ago, I would ask him to do that. And when he did it, I praised the hell out of him for doing it, saying, I really appreciate that. That really helps me. And if he forgot, I wouldn't make a big deal about it. So can you just remember to do that? And now today, I know when I ask him to take the bin out or to empty the dishwasher or whatever, he'll just go and do it happily. And it's I think there's a link there with that. But in staying with my son on that, and probably me as well, with the technology side of things, let's delve into the computer game area and learning through that. I didn't really think about it much when I was playing computer games as a kid as to whether that was helping me learn or my cognitive ability. But I know with my son, when he's playing computer games, where some of the games he's playing is strategy games. So we'll talk a bit about the strategy behind that and how he's taking over empires and things like that. And then one time as well, he was playing it, and I think he played 8 hours straight to early hours in the morning because he wanted to kill this big boss. And in the morning I woke up and found out what time he'd stayed up to, and he said, did 8 hours to kill the big boss, and said, great determination for sticking at it until you achieved your goal. And I tried to put it that way. Can we utilize that video game play when talking gamification, because games are fun, to actually help with the learning, or is it is there ways of doing that? I guess another example was we was playing a video game. We were playing on and off a racing game, and so he was having a race, I was having a race, and one race he'd lost it emotionally. He was losing it. He was crashing. He was getting more and more frustrated. And he was about to, as he finished the race, it was my turn, and he was about to run off in a huff. And I said, no, I'm not having a turn. You get back on there, and I want you to focus. I want you to focus on each corner, focus on your breathing, stay calm. He went, and he actually did the best race he'd ever done and won it. Is there, how can we use that computer games to help, especially children, but even ourselves when we're playing it, to help improve our intelligence?
Yeah, so there's computer games, and then there's the computer games, and so there's a lot of very popular computer games which really aren't good for your brain. for multiple reasons. But one of the reasons is they just keep going, and they're designed to keep going so that people just get on them and keep going and going and going and going. And kids get addicted to those because they're getting these little hits of what we were just talking about, the little reinforcements constantly. And so they want the next reinforcement, the next reinforcement, the next reinforcement, and they get addicted to that. And that's not great. But things like car racing games and that where there's a finish line, and you're racing against someone else or whatever it happens to be, they're quite good because, again, you've got a finish line and then it's over and one of you wins and then you can do it again if you want to. But there's a finish and then there's another finish and then there's another finish. So those things, those computer games can be quite good and they're really good for getting kids to do things like control their breathing and control their frustration and doing these things, which are all positive things. Or if it's one where they're working together, two kids are working together to achieve something or whatever, then that can be quite beneficial. As long as they're the games, that have an end point, rather than the games that keep going and going and going, because those games that keep going can cause real issues for kids. But did that answer that?
It's I guess from what you're saying, it's taking that technology, being aware that you can use it to be helpful, but you need to be aware of the constraints around that. As you said, a racing game has a finish line, and so you recognise you finish that race. If you want to start another one, that's a choice. But same token too, with those games that might be ongoing, it becomes a process of, okay, how are we structuring our life? Yes, we might have half an hour or an hour downtime. That's going to be our release, whatever it is, and I put that in context again. So I'm using my son a lot here in this episode, but it's my the experience that I've got, and I look at my son with sometimes he'll play video games for a long time, but I look at it and go, well, he's just got a great result on his exam. He's done the homework that the teachers asked for him. He's taken out the rubbish. He's done this. He's done that. Well, what else is there? I mean, and he's played his sport. He did the he plays hockey and he won the best and fairest for that. So I'm like, well, if he wants to spend his free time playing video game, then where am I to stop him doing that? But I'm just trying to add that. How do we then, as a parent, leverage that and say, well, how can I use that to get him thinking a little bit more about other things that are going to help improve his intelligence?
Absolutely, you're right. It's all got to be within context, and if your kid's doing all the right things, then why shouldn't they be allowed to spend some time playing something that they enjoy playing? And I completely agree. My son loves his video games. It's funny, my son loves video games. My daughter is just not interested in them, which is fine too, right? She'd rather sit down and read a book. But he loves doing it, and it's once he's done his chores and done all the rest of the stuff that he's expected to do, he's allowed to do that, and he enjoys doing it. But I think just making sure, that they're playing those games that actually do challenge them, rather than just taking them through some process, means that they are being challenged when they're actually doing it, rather than just simply going through a process. I mean, there's so many different games that it's hard. I know, like that. There's a soccer games which my son likes playing, and a baskell game that my son likes playing, but he likes playing it against his friends. Because they're playing against each other, right? And so, and with the basketball, and he loves playing basketball. Normally, he's in a great team, and they've been playing together for years. And so, he loves playing that because he can do things on that, slam dunks and stuff that he's not tall enough to do now. But that is also getting his brain into this fixed mindset of that's what I want to do, right? And so therefore it's already getting that motor learning going on of this is what I want to be able to achieve later on. So therefore he will probably, well, who knows how tall he'll get, whether or not he'll get tall enough to do that or keep going basketball. But if he does, and that's what he wants to do, then, that does get him into that mindset. And also the gameplay around it, right? Because these are the NBA players and stuff. And so if you play against a computer, you can see the gameplay that's going on and the strategy behind it and all those sorts of things, which is really cool as well, and helps with his gameplay when he's actually playing the real game as well. So, those things can help I think as well as as you were saying with the racing and stuff, learning how to control your frustration, learning how to control your stress levels, learning that relaxing is actually results in better response times and better decision making, are all really cool things that you can learn when you're doing those games.
And does it change the way we think about and approach things in a practical terms? And I'm drawing from, I'm a bit of a redneck and a NASCAR fan. You only turn left, that kind of thing. I'm going down the shop, I turn left, I turn left. But I was watching, and there was a number of, recently there's a number of younger generation people coming to the top tier of NASCAR and performing really well. But one thing that stood out for me was when they were talking about that was the difference between the older drivers and the newer drivers in how they set up the car. And when I used to race myself, it was a lot about how things felt. So you could feel, how the car felt was really important to how fast you went. But what they were saying now is, with the younger generation that are coming through, they've played video games for so long that they actually think about that process differently now, where it's not so much tactile, but it's more visual, because they've trained themselves to be visual as to where to turn from the game and the simulators that they've played. So the setup of the car is they can actually set up the car that actually performs a little bit better, but it might not be to the feel of the driver, because the feel has become irrelevant for them. They're more on the visual. And so the car might be, for someone that's used to the feel, it might feel uncomfortable for them, so they're not able to drive as fast. Whereas for this player, for this driver, because they've been trained their brain to be visual and notice the visual cues as opposed to the feeling cues, if the car's a little bit uncomfortable, doesn't matter, but it still goes fast. Is that a shift in how we think? Does that happen from technology? Do you see that as something in our future?
So there's been no research that I know around that. So that's an interesting one I hadn't heard before. From a brain perspective, it makes perfect sense, because we know if someone loses their sight, for example, then their other senses become more in tune. And we know that your visual cortex, which is your occipital lobe, which is actually a large part of our brain, because we're visual animals. So the vast majority of our perception is through vision, and our vision actually dominates. So our vision will override our other senses. But if someone does lose their vision, then their tactile perception then is done by that visual area of their brain. So it actually takes over that whole area, so that they're much better at the tactile stuff. So, if these kids are just using the visual and not using the tactile or vestibular system and so on, then that makes perfect sense that would get better, more dominant, and the other ones would fall off. It makes perfect sense from a neuroplasticity point of view, that whichever one you're doing more and practicing more, and if you don't have the other one to learn, because they don't have the tactile and vestibular stuff when they're on video games, then it makes sense. But I don't know of any research, so
I'm not sure that
I'm going to put that in there as it's actually a cool.
Because they didn't reference any research, but they did talk about how when the drivers were talking, the younger drivers were talking about it, they were talking more from a visual perspective, as opposed to the older drivers would be talking using words that were associated with feeling. So I'm not sure there was actually any specific research, but it was an observation that was made, and these young kids were coming in and just going really fast. But the crew chiefs were saying that they could set the car up in a different way, and it didn't really matter that it wouldn't have felt as good to the driver, because that wasn't part of that process. And I was linking that back to, again, that playing of computer games, that maybe it's not all bad, that there is, might be a different way of thinking, and if we process it that way, that there might be different applications that someone's learning. I said, when I look at my son and the determination and some of the aspects that he puts in and how he translates that into other areas of his life, I was wondering is that, but you've answered that question. And if we take that gamification a step further, because we know computer games are designed around the release of dopamine. You get these small little hits, and going back to the little plumber that used to get the gold coins. Every time you got a gold coin, you get a dopamine hit and you want to keep going. And I'm linking that back to, going all the way back to the 1930s when Snow White come out and they were singing "Whistle While You Work," and then Mary Poppins later said, "In every job that must be done, there's an element of fun." Can we, again, using that computer game methodology, the technology, can we approach things in a way where we gamify things, so that those steps, even though we might be thinking of going, that's a crappy task, but then if we gamify it and we go, well, actually these little steps are fun, and can we train our brain that way, so that, again, coming back to that procrastination element, that we're not procrastinating because we view these steps as fun?
Yes and no. So with the gamification, which is sort of a specific term for the way that you've got to increase the rewards as you go through, because if you don't keep increasing the rewards, which is why the tasks get more complicated, and then the rewards or whatever it is at the end gets bigger and bigger and bigger as they go through it. If you don't keep increasing it, then they don't get the same amount of dopamine release. So to get the same amount, because our brains are constantly adapting to our environment, each time you get a dopamine hit, you need a little bit more stimulus to get the same amount of dopamine hit.
So we're moving our baseline, essentially.
Yeah, you're shifting the baseline there. So that's the problem with the video games, is that you've got to keep upping the ante and upping the ante and upping the ante, which is why a lot of, especially those games that continue, will get more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. And so we need to do that. What's interesting is you don't have to do that if it's social. So if it's another person, it's a real person actually giving you rewards, actually telling you, hey, you're doing a good job, then you don't need that extra each time. Really? You can get it with the same amount. Okay. So if you're talking about using rewards or using positive reinforcement with your employees or with people you're working with, or with yourself, then that'll work really well, because it's you or it's another person actually doing it, and then you don't need to up it. If you're thinking, can we set up video games where people are doing tasks which can be rewarded, then that's an issue, because you're going to have to keep upping the reward.
I was thinking the former part, which I didn't know that component where you're saying, if I'm hearing correctly, if you're gamifying your life, but as an interaction with people, then you don't need to keep upping the ante, so to speak, to get the same dopamine. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. Yeah. So we're just as happy
between that and playing a game. How does that work?
Well, it's because we're social animals, right? And so we get so much reward from each other, and a lot more from each other than we do from abstract concepts. And video game is really just abstract, right? There's nobody there, and we know there's nobody really there, and the rewards you're getting aren't from anybody you know, and so it's not part of your in-group. Whereas if you're getting a reward from your in-group, it doesn't matter how many times your wife tells you she loves you, you get the same amount of dopamine every time that happens, because of that interaction and that fact that she's part of your in-group. Or if you're your boss, if you like your boss, you've got to like your boss first. If you like your boss,
that can be a challenge.
If you like your boss, and they're rewarding you for a job well done, then you're going to get the same amount of dopamine every time they do that, regardless. But also, you're going to get just as much a reward if they, again, give you a $20,000 raise, as opposed to coming up to you and saying, "Hey, that was really cool. Can I buy you a coffee?" Both those things are going to get the same amount of dopamine. So, give them coffee regularly rather than giving them a $20,000. Give them the $20,000 occasionally. But the coffee's good too, very good too.
So for me, when we're talking again, how can technology improve your intelligence? For me, I think my takeaway today is that, understanding that the reward system, the dopamine release from those people reactions doesn't need to continually be, the ante doesn't need to be upped. It's because of that connection that we can actually gamify things and have that reward. And I'm taking from what I think I heard you say that it applies to your own self-talk as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if we believe ourselves, There are a lot of people out there who don't believe themselves and
Yeah.
say, but if we believe ourselves and we're a positive person, then you don't have to up the ante every time. You can just take yourself out for a coffee, a couple of times a week, or you can, take yourself for a surf. And I'm sure you would understand that. I mean, I get just as much of a buzz from taking myself for a surf today as I did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I hadn't made that connection because I said in the morning and in the night, I will lay in bed and give myself a little pat on the back for something that I did well. But I hadn't really thought through that process of thinking that you had to up the ante in a video game, but in real life you didn't, because I feel good about it and I go to sleep feeling good and I wake up feeling good. And that's why I say I have awesome days every day, because I'm giving myself these little, but now I understand from what you've said that I don't need to, that little pat on the back that I'm giving myself is actually giving me that dopamine hit, and it's the same dopamine hit consistently because of that social interaction I'm having with myself.
Absolutely.
So
whereas if you had a little app on your phone that went, "Hey, well done, good day, good job," every evening, that would need to up the ante every day, because that wouldn't be a social, right? It wouldn't be a person doing it. There'd be something on your phone, and within a day or two, you'd be like, "Oh, bugger off."
Yeah. What if you record your own voice and do that way? Does that work if it's your own voice?
I'm not sure, actually. I don't think there's been anything done around that.
I remember. I'm just bringing that up because I had a crappy period many years ago, and I wasn't feeling great about myself and with what was happening, and I did that. I recorded and I just played it over and over in my head at night, or under my pillow, repeating it, and I think that helped.
It probably would, because I have in the front of my diary. I don't have the diary here, but in the front of my diary, I have a bunch of things that I read every morning, which are notes to me, to keep myself motivated and keep myself going. And again, they work the same every morning, right? And so, that's just written. So I'm sure, hearing it as well would probably be the same. Because it's you, or if you get your partner to do it, it's better probably.
Well, with that, so a partner, your partner saying, and especially if you take into account was the 5 languages of love. And I know for me, my language of by a long shot is words of affirmation. So someone telling me I've done a great job, I go, So that works.
If you have a good relationship with your partner,
yes, well, I've had some relationships that weren't so good, and I got the opposite. Yeah. What are you thinking about?
Right.
We've talked for a bit. If you're gonna sum up for people to take away how to use technology to improve your intelligence, what would you want them to take away? What would be the key nutshell or wisdom that you'd want them to take away from this discussion?
It'd be, think about what your brain is capable of doing and use your brain for that stuff, and then use the computer for the stuff that our brains aren't really good at. And that is, as we talked about, the big data stuff, and scheduling our days and our futures so that we actually get stuff done. Those things are really good to be done on a computer. And again, also turning off all your notifications and letting it hold all that information when people email you and because again, that information our brain's not good at holding on to. So a lot of people will, be down at the cafe or whatever, and will check their email, and then will have all that stuff in the back of their mind annoying them until after they've finished their coffee and done all those other things, and then they'll go back to their office and then they'll deal with them. But you've just spent an hour worrying about all this stuff that you didn't need to worry about. And so, use it as an extra memory system, and an organizational system, and it'll work really, really well for you, and it'll give you extra capacity during the day.
Awesome. I love that. And before we go, I've got to give you a plug for your book. So do you want to tell us a little bit, a key takeaway from your book as well, and a reason people will really enjoy reading the book, and we'll put the link into the show notes so they can purchase it as well. Tell us something from your book that would inspire people to want to read it.
Oh, thank you, Damien. So at the end of each chapter, there is actually a tip for, like some of the tips we've been talking about today, that you can instigate into your life, to actually improve your brain, make your brain healthier, and therefore be more productive and more connected to everyone around us. So And a lot of those tips and tricks will both increase your lifespan, but also improve your quality of life. So improve your mental health and your productivity and at home and at work. So well worth buying, I hope. And lots of good tips and tricks all through it. A very practical book. It's not all scientific. There's a lot of science in there, but it's simple science on how your brain works and then how you can hack your life so that you can be better at everything.
Yeah, I know I will vouch for that. It's a great book. Readers, do get hold of it. There is lots of useful tips, as Dr. Mark said at the end of each chapter, but it is very easy to read as well, but with a lot of depth of knowledge from a neuroscientist that knows how the brain works. Dr. Mark Williams, it has been such a pleasure having a chat with you again and sharing so much useful information on how to use technology to improve your intelligence. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thanks a lot for having me again, Damien. It's been really fun.
Thank you for being part of the Share.care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.